Well, hello, everyone. We're so pleased you're here with us today. My name is Frank Fear from FutureU, and I'm here with my colleague, Rubén Martinez. And we're here to talk about a very important subject with two principals, national principals, who are working very hard on this subject. And we're calling this Reclaiming Higher Education from Corporate Capture. And we're so pleased today to have with us Jasmine Banks, who's executive director of UNKOCH My Campus, and also Sharon Kirsch, who is an associate professor at Arizona State University and also the co-founder and director of research at Save Our Schools, Arizona. Just a few words of introduction. This is a subject I really wish more academic colleagues and more of the general public was invested in, and our two colleagues are working hard to make sure that happens. And those of us who are engaged, who are on board with this and see how critical this issue is, we each have different stories about how we got here. Mine started a long time ago academically through reading a variety of literature. But the story I want to share with you is something that happened to me personally. And I'm giving my age away here. Despite my looks, I'm a very young man. Actually, not. This goes back to the late 80s, early 90s. And I happened to find myself at a dinner with two people, another person, who was a principal at the time in getting something started in Washington, D.C. And it was to work on a very important initiative and the Points of Light Foundation. And it was a dinner where wine really came in handy, especially for me, because as the night went on, and I was thinking about what I was discussing with my students in class about what was happening nationally in terms of public policy with tax cuts, with more responsibility for social programs being shifted to philanthropists. And so after my colleague was talking about how great Points of Light would be, I began to raise questions about it. And I remember bringing with me, and believe it or not, I pulled it out of my notes, the definition of philanthropy I brought that night. And here's that definition: the desire to promote the welfare of others, expressed especially by the generous donation of money to good causes. Synonyms include humanitarianism, altruism, and public spiritedness. And I said to him, wine infused as I was, that's a really good definition, but it doesn't cover the entire spectrum, does it? And we had a great conversation at that point, and I was really pleased by the conversation that we had because he was open to the critique. And I remember, and again, I found these notes, I jotted this down, that philanthropy, quote unquote, also includes politically motivated giving from wealthy donors who seek to impose through their money, an agenda. And as we know with the work of UNKOCH and the work that Sharon's doing on K through 12 education, higher education, and it goes far beyond. And as I mentioned, we're so pleased today to have two people, not like me, who talk about it, but two people who are on the firing line of this important work to bring the importance of this subject matter to broader attention, both in higher education. It's amazing how many in public higher education, private education, don't see this as a major issue, and also the public. So let's start with Jasmine. Please introduce yourself and say a few words of introduction about UNKOCH My Campus.
Thank you so much, Frank, for having me. My name's Jasmine Banks. My pronouns are she, her. I live here in Arkansas, which is the territory of the Muskogee, Caddo, and Cherokee Nation. It's important for y'all to know that I'm a Virgo. I was born on September 4th, the same day as Beyonce, and also Labor Day, which are auspicious holidays. And it is my pleasure to organize and lead UNKOCH My Campus, which is a student-led campaign. Really, ultimately, our work boils down to intervening in the regressive political strategy of Charles Koch and his dark money network to capture our institutions that are designed for common good and erode our democracy. So we're a resistance movement, and we organize educators, students, community members, all the folks who are invested in seeing democratic institutions like education serve community on the planet rather than the corporate elite oligarchs. So thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for being with us. Sharon, please.
Hello, I'm Sharon Kirsch. I am one of the co-founders of Save Our Schools Arizona, and I really appreciate the invitation to be included today. So thank you to Frank and Rubén for creating FutureU. It's a very, very important platform, I think, to talk about neoliberalism, and just to have these conversations is so, so important. And so I also want to thank Jasmine for including me, because I focus on Save Our Schools Arizona focuses on K through 12. And really, we came into being not because we understood any of this stuff, but because a bunch of volunteers and moms and kids in school in Arizona knew that our public schools were facing a tremendous crisis, and kept seeing our legislature pass all of these crazy voucher programs to drain public funds away from public schools. And Save Our Schools came into being in 2017 by referring a bill that would have been the country's first universal ESA voucher education savings account, or what we in Arizona call empowerment scholarship accounts. The powers that be that I now know about wanted Arizona to be the first state in the nation to have universal vouchers. And so a group of volunteers with very, very little experience Googled, how do you refer a bill? And ran a 90-day campaign, got this on the ballot. And the people in Arizona, anytime they have an opportunity to weigh in on public education, always vote for our public schools, and therefore shot down this universal voucher expansion. So in spite of that, Arizona continues to be a petri dish for these sorts of things. And that's what Save Our Schools Arizona is focused on. So thanks for having me.
Wonderful story. Thank you so much, Sharon. And we're joined, as I mentioned earlier, by Rubén Martinez, the founder of FutureU. Rubén?
Thank you, Frank, and thank you, Jasmine, for joining us this afternoon, and you as well, Sharon. It's great to have you on board, and I'm really excited to hear the points of views that you will express. FutureU came into existence as an outgrowth of an international conference that we hosted here at Michigan State University. I believe it was in the spring of 2015. We had a great conversation, great discussion, but then after that, the question arose, what's next, right? And we just couldn't help ourselves but to say that we had to keep the dialogue going. And so a colleague of mine and I got this going, and people who participated in that conference also joined in, Frank being one of those. And so what we're trying to do is to ensure that the conversation continues, that we continue to expose what is going on in terms of the corporatization of higher education. We are greatly concerned that some of our colleagues are unaware of what is going on. So we're trying to promote that awareness. And we're also very interested in understanding the depth of how far neoliberalism has crept into our universities, and how we can resist and transform that influence. I'm reminded of the work of de Tocqueville, who visited the United States in the 19th century and spoke and warned really about the rise of what he called soft despotism, which I interpreted as the concentration of decision-making in a democracy. In contemporary terms, I understand that to mean the plutocrats. And pertinent to our conversation, it's the neoliberal plutocrats who are very invested in transforming our universities, who are very invested in imposing, used to be by stealth mode, now it's out in the open, imposing the principles of neoliberalism, which I consider to be radical individualism, small government, and flexible labor. So I'm pleased to have you join us today. I know that UNKOCH My Campus is a small but a mighty powerful organization, as is Save Our Schools. And these are important counterbalances to the neoliberal plutocrats. We need to have this conversation going. And Sharon, I tracked the whole attack on Mexican-American studies over at Tucson, Arizona. I'm having a conversation with Richard Martinez, the attorney who fought that battle and ultimately won. And so I am grateful for the two of you to join us and look forward to your comments.
Thanks, Ruben. One of the great things about this is that we have an opportunity to interact through a national network that might not be there otherwise. So it's great. And in fact, talking about that network, Nathan Rousseau is with us. Nathan, if you would like to unmic yourself there just a second. Nathan gave a wonderful program for us several months ago. Nathan, I'll turn to you for an introduction.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Nathan Rousseau, I'm an associate professor of sociology at a branch campus of Indiana University, and been interested in neoliberalism for a number of years now, and agree with, I'm sure all of you that it has eroded education, K through higher education. And unfortunately, I see that trend continuing. And I'm glad that there is this platform here for people to express their concerns.
Mm-hmm. And you can watch the program with Nathan. It's posted on our YouTube channel, where this program will be positioned in a few days. It's live right now. We appreciate all those folks who are tuning in live. And Ruben talked about the network at Michigan State. We're pleased to have Zach Kaiser, who is part of that network, College of Communications, Arts and Sciences. Zach, I'll turn to you.
Thanks, Frank. I'm Zach Kaiser. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Art History, and Design. And yeah, I've been involved with this initiative for a long time, and I've been inspired by Ruben and Frank's work for a really long time. They've served as mentors and inspiration for me. And the platform that they've built sort of feels like my academic home, maybe more than anywhere else. So I'm just glad to be here and glad to support, and really looking forward to the conversation today.
Thank you very much, Zach. Jasmine, Ruben talked about power, how powerful UNKOCH My Campus is. And one of the things that's really impressive is how you've been able to connect both with a practitioner network across the country, policymakers and academics, and terrific name recognition. So you introduced us to UNKOCH My Campus. Please go into more detail, specifically as you evolve it, the two major research reports that have been published. We featured one on critical race theory a few weeks ago, but there's a new one that's been released on K through 12 that I know Sharon's been involved in. So let me turn it back to you.
Yeah, so UNKOCH My Campus, to be frank, never intended to publish a critical race theory report. It, for all intents and purposes, is pretty much outside of what we do in our normal organizing. But as we began to see headlines, because we're always following narrative shift trends, especially as they relate to populist movements, because the Koch network, which is a vast, for folks who are new to what the name the Koch network is, it is a vast, very nebulous, loose association of academics, public intellectuals, think tanks, lobbyists, and various nonprofit and C3 and C4 entities. And so what we know about our opposition is they don't actually have a base. Their ideas are not favorable. And they don't do a ton of base building and developing constituencies to build political power. So what they do instead is dog whistle and foment populist and white nationalist movement to activate to their political ends. And so when we started seeing suddenly these very suspicious parent groups and individuals following the same sort of rhetoric, that we saw back in 2017 and 18 around DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, our spider sense started tingling. And so we started around June to document all of the media hits, measure sentiment, and then follow the money through records requests, as well as just trying to trace back where funding came from. And that at that time, we knew we had to act. We knew that this was just going to get even more intense, especially on the heels of the George Floyd reckonings of last summer. And what was produced was a powerful report that demonstrated that no one prior to the Koch think tanks pushing these talking points and doing these media briefings were concerned about critical race theory at all. And in fact, many of the parent groups that were concerned were astroturfed by think tanks or nonprofit entities that had direct relationship to Koch network entities. So that was our critical race theory. And we were actually creating the critical race theory report and writing our op-eds and doing our media interventions while also writing our K-12 report. And we are a team of 5 with student fellows who are part-time organizers with us, and we were able to pull out both of those things. I always say what my grandmama said, she was a Black Indigenous woman from the South, born and raised. And she always talked about how Black and Indigenous folks, especially women, when we're given weeds and throw away, we make these beautiful banquets, collard greens and ham hocks. And so that's kind of what UNKOCH had to do. We have these little scraps and we produce these really powerful organizing tools. Our K-12 report demonstrates exactly what Sharon is working to intervene, on the state level in Arizona, that the Koch network's ultimate goal, because they are in that neoliberal constellation that believes deregulation and small government, erosion of our democratic institutions, that means that they have to create and proliferate, ultimately with the goal of destabilizing public school funding and budgets. And then once that destabilization happens, they create those fractures, either through culture wars or through backdoor deals or Koch-funded lobbyists and legislators. Once that gap is open, they propose these private solutions that ultimately pad their bottom line, honor their stakeholders. But what it does is deepen the systemic structural inequity that has been evident, before and since Brown versus Board of Education. And it's no accident that the same folks that are engaging these tactics were folks who actually were not supportive of school integration. And so we're seeing how school choice, the pro-school charter school movement, is just school resegregation in a different name. And ultimately, the goal is to abolish public school and provide corporate private solutions. And the reason why UNKOCH My Campus is diametrically opposed to that vision of the world is because we know that vision of the world is one where oligarchies, and in some places, folks who are deeply embedded in this evangelical theocracy, they are the folks who get to make decisions for communities, rather than an inclusive, democratized process where education reflects the best of our community. And so that's why we resist and intervene.
Terrific. Thank you so much. I would encourage everybody watching to, if you haven't gone to the website, UNKOCH My Campus. One of the other reports you've done, which I've referred to a number of times and also referred other people to, is the report where you followed the money, I think from 2005 to 2019, in terms of the money from the Koch network, and very importantly, where that money has landed. So you can actually go to your school and look at the school. It brings up the data and the total amount of money for that school. Do you want to say a few words about that report? Because I think that's a very powerful report as well.
Yeah, we have our funding report, and then if you go to the resources tab on unkochmycampus.org, you can click Find Your Campus, and that allows you to search by school, by donor. You can use all kinds of keywords. So what's really important about this, and we get this question all the time, well, don't all wealthy, billionaires and industries donate to higher education and expect some kind of influence? And the idea here is, well, yeah, that's part of the problem. That's part of the problem. But Charles Koch and his dark money network are very distinct. They are not simply providing donations to an institution because they believe in the institution of higher education and they want to solve for the gaps of public funding. What they're actually doing, and this is stated from Charles Koch, is that using higher education as a site of political control, where they can create both a talent pipeline of young people who are piped into their very harmful corporate interests, and also production of ideas that influence culture and policy and sway our communities in their favor. And so the first bit of public records that we were able to obtain was from 2005, and then it has ramped up since then. And so our report shows how there's been multiple millions and millions of dollars poured into strategic geographically located sites that allow the Koch network to control and influence think tanks, as well as use prestigious universities in particular as a site of image laundering. We discovered last year that at George Washington University, a well-known and prestigious university, there's a Regulatory Studies Center. Guess what? The Regulatory Studies Center is funded by ExxonMobil and Koch Industries. Guess what? The Trump administration adopted a vast majority of the recommendations that came out of that center for deregulation. And Koch was able to uncover that along with Sunrise GW and Public Citizen. So we're seeing that this actually has material outcomes. Their donations are producing democratic realities and conditions that harm folks who are working class, poor, Black and brown. It's reproducing transphobic legislation, like keeping students from using the bathroom who are trans. It's eroding choice and women and pregnant people's rights. And so knowing where the money is the first step in understanding what sort of things are being influenced in the community and where the chokehold of power is.
I love that concept of image laundering because it applies in practice. Recently, for example, a notice came across my desk from a university development office promoting and offering help to faculty who would write proposals to a foundation that's part of this dark money network. And it was almost as though it was a normal, natural, everyday, will help you get your funding. And it really has an underbelly to it. And also a university who signed a contract with a sports gambling company now has sports gambling advertised at its games. And this is the kicker, involves and offers internships and placements to undergraduate students. It's part of that image laundering. Very good. Well, Sharon, you're what we called an engaged politically scholar practitioner. That's a lot of words, but you're really doing it both on campus, connected to SOS Arizona, and this political engagement of faculty is so critical. So let's turn to you for more details on what you're doing in Arizona.
Sure. So Jasmine did a great job providing the sort of national context for this, the history of this. I think what Arizona brings to the table is we have been a petri dish for a quarter of a century now to try out all of these different privatization schemes and ways of draining public funds away from K-12 elementary and high schools. And so, for example, Arizona was the first state in the nation to have tax credit vouchers. So they're called STOs, or school tuition organizations. And it started, and this is part of the playbook in Arizona and elsewhere, it started as just a small program. So this is just going to be a little individual tax credit so that an individual can give their state taxes to one of these organizations, and then the organization will dole that out to poor kids to give them tuition, to cover tuition at private schools. Okay, so people say, okay, sounds sort of harmless. But just like with our ESA voucher program, the Empowerment Scholarship Program, where the state actually hands money directly to a family, and in Arizona, those vouchers are anywhere from $6,000 to $42,000 a year. That also started as a $1.6 million a year program. And so this kind of systematic, incremental, step-by-step process of draining these funds away from our public schools. So what started as a $1.5 million program is now the ESA vouchers are approaching $200 million a year. The STO tax credit vouchers are approaching $300 million a year. And the STOs, because they're little businesses, it's become this cottage industry in Arizona. The STO organization can keep 10% of every dollar that comes through them. And so there are dozens and dozens of STO organizations in Arizona. And many of them are big, big companies, and they pay their exec six-figure salaries. And of course, this is all taxpayer dollars. It's set up to be completely unaccountable, completely not transparent. It's very difficult to get information about how the money's being spent, who it's being spent on. For the STOs, we do know, because the Arizona Republic did some digging, that 93% of those tax dollars go to private Christian schools. And so when you look at the history, the legislative history of what's happened in Arizona, because we have long had not just a Republican-controlled House and Senate in our state legislature, but a a Koch Republican-controlled House and Senate. So we know also from investigative journalism done by the Arizona Republic that the bill that Save Our Schools referred, that there had been years before this at work in trying to make sure that Arizona would be the first state to pass these ESA vouchers. And they dumped nearly $250,000 into different campaigns of our state legislators to ensure that this bill would pass. Now, even with all that work, that bill almost didn't pass. It passed by one vote, and only after it had been amended, and only after Save Our Schools, as our sort of very new to this lobbyists, were lobbying, especially with our rural legislators, because all of this privatization stuff especially hurts our rural communities because they don't have private schools to go to. They don't have any ways to spend these ESA vouchers. And so they don't support them. And it doesn't in any way impact in a positive way the constituents of these legislators. But nonetheless, we have a Koch-supported governor, Governor Ducey, and Koch-supported legislators. And so they pass all kinds of legislation to further and expand these programs. And so when you look through that legislative history, it's these little expansions year after year after year. And if we get to it, I'll tell you what I'm calling privatization 2.0, which is what they tried to do last legislative session, which is even deeper ways of draining more of this money away.
Mm-hmm. And as your story aptly describes, the connection between government and the philanthropists, the money, is really, really critical. Another issue, Sharon, it's come up in several of these programs we've done, is how does this work connect to your academic responsibilities at Arizona State? And how do sort of the powers that be and colleagues view your work as what we call a politically engaged scholar? Because that's not the conventional image of what faculty members do, and yet it's increasingly important in relationship to the issues that, for the most part, the public doesn't know about, they don't see readily. And one of your jobs, obviously, is to create awareness and then to basically engage in change efforts. So if you could talk about that, that would be terrific.
So I am an associate professor of English and Rhetorical Studies at Arizona State University, which I'm sure you all know is one of the largest, if not the largest, state university in the country. The New American University, as it dubs itself, is one of the premier neoliberal universities in the United States. Now, part of what's happened is just in the same way that our legislature cut funding to K through 12 more than any other state in the country when the economy tanked in 2007, it did the same to our state universities. And that funding has never been restored. And so that puts the university in a position to have to look elsewhere for funding or close programs down. That's, of course, the story across the country. So as an activist and an advocate for public education, I have tried very carefully to keep my work with Save Our Schools Arizona, which really is focused on K through 12, separate. When I'm doing that work, I don't present myself as an ASU faculty member, and that has become increasingly difficult because the lines are very clear between K through 12 and university, and the way that neoliberalism is seeping in at every place, every opportunity. So yeah, I do presentations to my colleagues at ASU. It's difficult because there's not a lot of faculty engagement at ASU at the university level. And so one of the things I've worked with Jasmine with is to try to get more faculty involved on a more consistent basis. To defend faculty, though, we are insanely busy, and the pressures we're a Research One university, and the pressures to publish, and you guys know, it's tough. There are a lot of pressures, especially on young faculty, especially on faculty trying to get tenure. So it's difficult, but I do think that the opportunities I've had to speak to faculty on my campus, they don't know. They simply do not know. And these are super smart, otherwise pretty engaged people, but they just don't, they may have some sort of general sense of it, but they do not understand the extent to which this is a coordinated effort at a national level that is in fact having a material impact on our public schools and on our public universities. So again, that's why I think, having this experience, having this opportunity just to talk today, recording this, trying to get the word out is some of the most important work that we can do. Because again and again, when you talk to people, when you poll people in the state of Arizona, no one supports, very, very few people support all of this legislation that gets shoved through our legislature. It's a very small group of people. And so helping people to understand, to connect those dots, and to really find a way to have a voice in their communities and in their universities is enormously important.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that important work. It is so critical, as is another dimension of this work, and that is faculty members who are analyzing universities and essentially taking the same lens that the two of you are using to look at dark money, to look at their own universities and ask the question, are we not part of this neoliberal network that otherwise we criticize, don't critique, we criticize? And the answer is, for the most part, yes. Mm-hmm. And you're located at an R1 university, and that's where the tire sometimes doesn't hit the pavement in terms of faculty engagement for the reasons you've described. It's so difficult. Not that it isn't difficult elsewhere, but the point is that oftentimes that's the area where the greatest impact can be made. And so we appreciate your work. Rubén, I want to turn to you for any comments you want to make at this point in terms of what you've heard. Obviously, it's center stage to our mission at FutureU, and I'll turn to you.
Thank you, Frank, and thank you, Jasmine and Sharon, for your comments. I really appreciate them. I'm glad that Jasmine talked about dog whistle politics. It reminds me of the propaganda techniques that are being used by the neoliberals to manipulate the public, which today, because we've transformed the public into insatiable consumers, there's no real grounding in terms of the ability to be able to distinguish fact from fiction. And so when people hear it, and particularly hear it on social media, they're unable to distinguish what is being presented to them from verifiable knowledge. That's one of the great problems that we face in addressing these issues, is an epistemic crisis that has been generated by these kinds of tactics. I know that early on, when I became aware of the neoliberal endeavors, the language that they used were, words like choice, which obviously is one used in Arizona, and freedom, which is today grounding the anti-vax movement, both very shallow concepts that people don't really understand in terms of their true meaning. And I think it's very important to also understand what's going on with critical race theory, because that's just a Trojan horse that's being used to mobilize people who hear the code words and believe that government is out to do something to them and so on, and continues to promote that base that is very powerfully against the government today. In fact, it was just a couple of days ago, one of the MAGA lawyers spoke about there not being any need at all for government, which really what they are, and I've been arguing this for a long time, is that they're anarchists. They're right-wing anarchists who do not want to be regulated. And I think to some extent it's gotten out of control from the neoliberals themselves, so that it's become now an authoritarian movement that really lacks rationality. White supremacists like to pride themselves on saying that one of the virtues of being white is to be more rational, and everybody else is less rational, less intelligent, and so forth. But if you take a look at these people going before school boards and tell me how rational they are, I'm caused to think about what the heck is going on. I'm also glad that there's some conversation about following the money here. It may appear that the Koch brothers and that movement is a loose network of like-minded individuals, but I think that covertly there's a lot of deeper structures of coordination that's taking place. We just don't see it. They hide it from us. And if we really could follow the money, if we had that capacity to follow the money in the same way that the government has the way to follow the money, I think we would reveal a great deal of things. I am reminded of the work of Domhoff back in the last century, when there was this question about, is there a ruling class? Is there a governing class and so on in capitalism? Well, he showed it by studying interlocking directorates, that in fact, there's a lot of networks that are operating out there that are not visible to most of us, that does in fact give real concrete material existence to those kinds of networks, that there are such things as Bohemian Grove retreats, where these people get together and plan their next steps. There is the Mont Pelerin Society, which started the movement globally and still continues to exist. I tried to get into the conference in Florida a few years ago. I didn't get in. I don't know why. I mean, I'm just someone wanting to learn what's going on in the world, and that was not something I was able to do. But there are some real serious issues here. I know that Arizona, when Sharon talks about Arizona being the putrid dish for experimentation, it reminds me of Chile and the Chicago boys, right? Because Chile became the test site for the implementation of neoliberal principles and so on. So I think, we're expanding beyond higher education, but we're still within the educational arena. Education and higher education really are just windows to the larger set of dynamics to neoliberalism. And the way that I got into this was by focusing, having some concern about neoliberalism and Latinos, Latinas, Latinx in higher education. And then it just became a window that got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Being a sociologist like Nathan and Frank, I don't have any respect for disciplinary boundaries. So here I am thinking that we really even need to get both deeper into what these folks are doing and to take a look at those interlocking networks, but also to see how we can help people rise out of this epistemic crisis, because the attack on democracy is an attack on academic freedom. And all of these things are interrelated, and the struggle just gets bigger and bigger. And I'm so glad to see that organizations are being formed to counterbalance the work of the neoliberal plutocrats, and to give us a chance to both restore democracy, but to save the academy really and education from the assault on academic freedom. So thank you both for your comments today.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead, please.
I will jump in. You said so many different things that I want to touch on. You named anarchism, and I want to say that a phrase that we use within UNKOCH My Campus is anarcho-capitalist, because that's really at the core of Charles Koch's vision for the world, is a form of anarcho-capitalism. You named Chile, and I also want to urge folks to look up Chile, Pinochet, and the Koch network, Koch operatives, who were very much involved in that. And then secret societies, right? The Koch brothers' father came out of the Nazi movement, were founding family members of the John Birch Society, which opposed Martin Luther King, which opposed civil rights movements, right? That birthed modern neo-white power and neo-Confederate movements. And so these secret societies, it brings to mind the Federalist Society, capturing our courts and utilizing them for these like means of this network. And it's really, really easy for folks to get attracted to follow the money, which is a thing that you did name. And it's really critical. We want that as a tactic in our toolbox, but simply stating a problem is not enough, or simply knowing about a problem isn't enough. I've said to so many of our organizers, if we put billboards up, if we put it on mainstream news, Charles Koch and his dark money network are controlling our institutions, people will go, oh, okay, yeah, we figured. And so for us, what it really is about is building out political will of the people. Communities and grassroots organizers are the antidote to intervening in strategies for oligarchic control of our democracy. And that sounds like a lot of higher ed lingo, but it's real stuff. It's about people power. Also, the other thing that I want to name, which is just so critical, is rejecting the habits of this anarcho-capitalist structure and this neoliberal reality that we're living in. We have to reject their methods. We have to embrace abundance where they promote competition. We have to understand what autonomy, but also collective care looks like in response to their rugged individualism. We have to think about imagining a beloved state where people have what they need to survive and have safety, dignity, and belonging. And so that's also a part of our work, is not borrowing their tactics and the way that they operate to try and be the solution. A movement ancestor and elder always taught us that we cannot dismantle the master's house with the master's tools, right? And so that's why UNKOCH really tries to organize in a very different way outside of the nonprofit industrial complex or adjacent to it. And I'm just really grateful that folks are even having this conversation, that our institutions of education should not be a public luxury. They shouldn't be reproducing class stratification in honor of wealthy donors and corporations, but really should be about protecting our people, our climate, our liberties, and advancing social and economic progress.
And this is why this subject matter is so important to be taught, conversed at the undergraduate and graduate level. It's really critical. Sharon, you're a humanist. We all know the humanities are under, my God, an attack. They're downsized, they're being downsized. Is this subject matter what we're talking about? Do you see it on campus at all at Arizona State?
Yes, in some ways, but not in a coordinated way, and not, I think many of my colleagues obviously grew up in a theoretical world where they understand neoliberalism. But I think specific to education and specific to their own institutions, there's a lot of connection to be made there. Mm-hmm. And if I could just follow up on something Rubén said,
Sure.
And Jasmine also, I was thinking that this idea of the sort of dog whistle politics, and one of the things we discovered in Arizona is that these really loud, angry mobs of white people at school boards, some of them were the same people showing up at different school boards, didn't even have kids in the school, right? Trained with certain talking points. So we know that that's just a diversion, that the people in power are happy to have that happening, because what's happening behind the scenes, for example, in Arizona, is they slipped through a transportation bill this last legislative session. We fought it, but we were not successful. And it's one of those things where on the surface, you think, oh, the state will just give money to kids so they can go to their charter schools or they can go to their private schools. The state will pay for that because there aren't buses right to those schools. So that's good. So then all kids can take advantage of school choice. But what it means in practice is it further dilutes the understanding of our schools as community schools and community entities. And it all started in Arizona with open enrollment. And again, you think, oh, well, if I don't want to go to the school right down the street, maybe I'll go to the one a few blocks over. But again, what that means in practice is the kids who can leave. And the kids who can't are stuck in that school. Mm-hmm. So rather than the parents and the families and the teachers all coming together and saying, we got to fix this. Mm-hmm. This needs to be a great school for our community and all our kids.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I use the words resegregation, but at the global conversation around what is happening, the outcomes for all of these realities is another form of dispossession. And I did want to underscore Ruben's point around disinformation. The Koch network has been behind disinformation with the Reopen protests. They've been behind disinformation with election fraud, which doesn't exist, by the way. They have been behind COVID misinformation and vaccines. And so this whole utilizing disinformation to disenfranchise and keep our communities from one another and sharing information is a really powerful tactic of theirs. And I just want to express some compassion and care for those communities, those populist movements, because those are people who have been disenfranchised and dispossessed, and they are being used. And so, I think of it a little bit of like groupthink and brainwashing. How we break through to those groups of folks is through compassion and love, and through consistent, clear, fact-based rhetoric, and to organize them, because the trap here and the joke is the Koch network has succeeded in getting these groups of constituencies, these bases, to act against their own vested interest and their own well-being in service of this billionaire wealthy elite class. And so they're also a part of the trap as well. And we need to bring them back into community so that we can get back to the job of good governance, so that we can get back to the job of saving our planet and taking care of our communities.
So well stated. And, part of this image laundering you talked about earlier is to turn to academics who support those ideas and platforms. I was at a dinner party not long ago where the person next to me said, well, you're an academic, and started talking about the work of Thomas Sowell at Stanford and how great it was. She was reading his book, assuming that, of course, as a fellow academic, I would just say, oh, he's terrific. It's wonderful. These are great ideas. And obviously, that's not how I responded. I tried to respond delicately, but that's really important. Nathan, you would like to get into the conversation, so please.
Yeah, thank you. I jotted down some notes, and I'd like to read them back to you and just give my reaction to some of the things that y'all are discussing. Social instability undermines public concern about preserving democratic practices. Social instability undermines public concern about preserving democratic practices. Social instability also drives people toward absolute beliefs, such as religious fundamentalism and evangelicalism. The commercialization of both right-wing thought and left-wing thought has oversimplified complex ideas. This has contributed to social polarization, political polarization, that serves as an effective distraction. Schools are moving toward vocational training, from high school to community college to perhaps university training. Education as a means of preserving democracy is not a part of mainstream educational discourse. The idea of connecting education and democracy, is an idea that dates back nearly 100 years ago now. You go back to John Dewey, and we are probably further away from it today than we were 50 or 60 years ago. It's just not a priority. Finally, I want to cite one of my favorite books. I go to it often. I should keep it under my pillow, but I do not. Richard Hofstadter, Anti-Intellectualism in American Life, where he distinguishes between intellect and intellectualism. I'll just share a little bit about myself. I was the first person in my family to graduate from college, to get an advanced degree. And while I've done well in higher education, I've always felt a little bit like a fish out of water. And that's because I am surrounded by a lot of very intelligent people who are not intellectuals. They have great intellect, but they seem very disconnected from mainstream life. And of course, there are many, many examples of people who do not fit that description. And so I don't intend to leave those folks out. But by and large, why are so many academics clueless about what we are talking about today is because they may be very smart people in their field, but they are also stuck in tunnel vision. Thank you.
Just shout out, Nathan. Both of my parents did not graduate high school. I'm the first from my family to graduate junior high school, undergrad, and then get an advanced degree. Now, like many millennials, I was sold a bill of goods around student loans and public service. So I'm $150,000 in debt for changing the trajectory of my family's history. I have 4 kids and a wife and won't be able to buy a house because of my student loans and credit score. But to say that I, did something breaking a family legacy of not accessing higher education meant a lot to me. It was what I thought I was doing for a better life. And yeah, I wanna honor your feedback around, there are folks that enter into higher education because they believe getting a good education means getting a good job, which means accessing wealth. And that is not what's happening. Whereas some folks get into higher education because they believe in this like struggling through ideas and really having this like transformative experience that makes you into a better citizen and prepares you to go out into the world and participate. That's, also why I love school. My teachers and educators saved my life in many ways. Growing up as a homeless child, it was my teachers who got me food and got me clothes and took me from homeless shelter to homeless shelter. So education for me feels like a reckoning. And so anyway, I just wanted to honor your journey and what you've seen and what you've named, because that's also real in the environment of education.
Jasmine, what you just said should be on a mission statement for colleges and universities everywhere.
First of all, this has been amazing, Jasmine. I just could listen to you preach all day. You're doing it's amazing. I feel very inspired. So thank you. I guess I'm curious. I've been feeling, I don't know, maybe, this is the millennial thing too. I've been feeling a little bit hopeless lately. And, just seeing all the stuff that's going on, Florida trying to audit the trying to audit the like political leanings of their academic institutions, that with that bill that DeSantis just signed. And I just, Jasmine, you mentioned sort of this idea of putting forth some kind of alternative vision. And I think that it's essential that we do that, particularly in higher education. And I come from the design school background. And so a lot of what I do is sort of putting visions of what the future could be like in front of people. One of my concerns, and I don't quite know how to address it, I'm curious what you think, is like, we've internalized as academics, even those of us who kind of identify as, perhaps radical academics, we've internalized that sort of neoliberal impetus ourselves. And so, the visions that I might put forward as for an alternative society also tend to serve my own professional ends. And I'm fearful that like that system has such a powerful inertia or momentum, I guess I'm not really sure which word to use there, that I don't quite know how to like counterbalance it or counteract it. And I'm wondering, I don't know, I'm just curious on sort of like thoughts you have, or, like next steps or where we go. Like, how do we build on the work that you're doing so that it doesn't become like a toolkit for like academic professionals to sort of further their CVs and also claim that they're doing something good for the world, but like actually like, let's freaking change this. Even if it means like, I don't need to do my work for a year. Like, let's do it. Let's do the real work.
Well, there are lots of folks that are doing that. I just want to name that, with the increased privatization, corporatization of higher education, we see things that harm, like we see norms that are harming the university. At the top of mind is just like university rank, and the kind of the prestigious versus non versus X, Y, and Z, the massive swell of administration versus faculty educators, right? Like the lack of of governance mechanisms. And, you know, these things create the conditions for wealthy dark money networks like the Koch network to come in and exert control. And so we have this space where the experience of the university and the students become the commodity, and the educators, whether they're tenured or not, become the workers. And then you have these administrative overlords who aren't even part of the workers. And so in my vision of how we began to maybe even implement strategic reform that is leading to transformation, looks like addressing the appropriate you know, size of administrations and their power. It looks like democratizing, creating more democratized process, which requires that educators begin to unionize and not be afraid of that and work for that. It begins to look like true free speech and direct action and demonstration for students who have become the commodity, and the communities that these universities are embedded in start to happen. When you are looking at strategies for transformation, community, grassroots, direct action always takes the cake, always gets us where we're going. And so I think there's that. And then there also has to be this level of resistance where academics say, I'm going to pledge not to take any Koch money or image launder. And the institutions also do, right? Mm-hmm. We see this now with industry around how tobacco, you know, manipulated institutions of higher education. We see this with the opioid crisis and the Sacklers. And I absolutely believe in 5 to 10 years that we're going to see the exact same thing with the Koch network, right? They funded insurrectionists. They funded this proliferation of lies about what a democracy can look like. They have destabilized so many parts of our society. And as we continue this careen, we can accept this authoritarian future that they are financing, or we can stop it. And so I think that resistance is really, really critical. We have to be engaging in this disrupt and build process. I also think that when we're talking about your concern around not reproducing, like, how are you making academic text available to people who are outside of the university? Like, where is open source? Where are we sharing information? And really rejecting this banking sort of model of what education looks like. So I love every time I see academics and intellectuals providing popular education, because I did not get, if any of you consider me on this panel smart or an intellectual, let me bust open that myth. I went to a private evangelical Christian university. They taught me, I had to sign a lifestyle agreement not to have sex before marriage, not to dance, not to drink. I was taught the Old Testament Bible as sort of like the like measure of humanity's good. I was a very young person. I had a mentor who suggested I go to a private Christian university, and I went, and I did not learn anything. The things that I am articulating in this space with you, if you consider them intellectual, are all because of academics who made their curriculum, their courseworks public, and I taught myself. And then I had academics who I would, from various institutions, not knowing if they were prestigious or famous, email them and ask them questions, and they would collaborate with me. So yeah, I come to this conversation in a very interesting intersection. And if you're wondering about my undergrad, it was John Brown University, which is a very, very fundamentalist Christian university.
Mm-hmm. And another, well stated, and another way, obviously, is what Sharon's doing. And that is to have very formal and strong connections, not only with a national network, UNKOCH My Campus, but also with Save Our Schools Arizona. Those connections, that's a positive interlocking relationship versus the kind we see so often. For example, if you look at who's serving on nonprofit boards, who are they? They're in the moneyed class. Oftentimes they're there because of their money, and guess what they do? They bring a corporate way of thinking, they take a neoliberal ethic, and they impose that without really imposing it. That's the way you do things. And so if you look at, for example, the way nonprofits have evolved over the last 30 years, what used to be executive directors, you're one of the few, Jasmine, they're chief executive officers. Yep. And if you talked about administrative overlording, walk down the corridor of a major nonprofit, and you will fall over 35 vice presidents.
Yep.
Maybe 25. And so you get this corporate way of doing things. And so I think what it suggests is that one of the things too is for people like ourselves and I would say, Zach, we're not alone, and that's one of the purposes of this conversation, is just to talk about this stuff. And what's interesting about talking about it, you're not talking theory, you're putting language to what people can see with their own eyes, but they may not be seeing yet. Not that we're brilliant, but the fact is we've gotten to the point where this is really important for us. And so we're disdaining it, but we're naming it. And then we're proclaiming, as Jasmine and Sharon have done, what we do next, what comes next. And along those lines, that's a segue. It always comes at UNKOCH My Campus, what comes next. And one is you have 2 action days coming up. And that's one of the reasons we wanted to schedule this program right now in early October, because you have 2 days of action coming up later this month. And there are 2 days for a very good reason. And I'll turn back to you, Jasmine, to talk about the days of action.
Yeah, well, every year around the end of October, because the original groups of student activists that were a part of building out what is now UNKOCH My Campus had a love of Halloween, and it's always a very fun time for young people on campus. So they originally decided one day to dress up as Ghostbusters, but be Coke Busters, and sort of exercise the ghost of Coke as Ghostbusters, but be Coke Busters, and sort of exercise the ghost of Coke. So this year on the 28th and 29th, we are taking a collective day of action. We are being Coke Busters in all sorts of ways. We've got actions that are unfolding on the ground with students and community members and faculty that are doing demonstrations in various ways. But if, like many of us, you're not able to join one of those on the ground actions, we are asking everyone to fill out a form. We'll share that link, but we're sending postcards to Secretary Cardona. We are not completely convinced that Cardona is not unaware of the Koch network's control over higher education. We're not invested in the myth of ignorance of our federal administration any longer. But we're going to provide some public education, some popular education. So if you put your name and your information, the team and all of our organizers will be sending out postcards on your behalf. And then even today, we found out, it was a surprise to us, but if you're wanting to take early action, you can go to googlemaps.com. And did you know, if you look up the Charles Koch Foundation, you can leave a review on the website to talk about the impact of the foundation. You should check out on Twitter. I tried it this morning and sent a screenshot. So yeah, we've got various things that are unfolding. You can go to unkochmycampus.com. You can sign up for updates, and you'll get a text, an email, and sometimes even a call on how you can take action locally or on a national level.
Mm-hmm. Terrific. Secretary Cardona is under a lot of pressure. In fact, you may have seen this, but change.org has started a petition. President Biden has said, we need to reduce student debt by $10,000 per student. And it's just been sitting there for a long time. So, Zach, you talked about internalizing neoliberalism, and it's internalized in all of us. In some ways, it's really important for us to always ask the question, wait a minute now, let me pull back. Am I thinking like a neoliberal? And we sometimes lull ourselves into sleep that if we have a liberally oriented, progressively oriented, president, administration, that everything will follow along those lines. Well, obviously, it's not that easy.
I'd like to
sure,
say
please.
something along those lines. We've talked kind of indirectly about how the meaning of freedom has really been usurped by a neoliberal perspective. It's really, the definition of it has been narrowed. But I feel pretty strongly that the meaning of inspiration has also been usurped. People are waiting to be motivated by others rather than be intrinsically motivated to do the right thing. And so, maybe this says something about my age. When I look back 50 years, if I look back to the 1960s, people were ready to take action, and they put their fear in the back seat to take action. Today, people are really trapped by their economic fears. And this is exactly the way neoliberal leaders want things to be. And so breaking this is a very complicated matter. So what I'm saying is that the language, as you were just saying, Frank, the language that people use today is oftentimes within neoliberal terms, not only freedom, but also inspiration.
Very well stated response.
Nathan made earlier about instability leading to really some populist movements, whether it's left or right and so on. I think it's very important that we also make it clear as intellectuals that that instability is due to the practices of neoliberalism, that they ushered that in. And then when we talk about how we can get the public to understand that, we need to understand, or at least come to grips with the fact that we have to cope with the epistemic crisis. When people are unable to tell fact from fiction, and they are grounded in beliefs rather than in verifiable knowledge, we have a massive problem, because beliefs are not grounded necessarily in reality. They're just beliefs, right? But if people adhere to them and their behavior is aligned with them, we have a major barrier there that we have to address. And when it comes to the issue of our colleagues in the academy really being unaware, we have to keep in mind the kinds of tools that the neoliberals have used against us. One of them is performance-based funding, and I know that Sharon speaks about funding issues over in Arizona. If you take away funding, you can just about get any leader of an organization to come crawling back to you to see how they might be able to retain both their position and also the organization functioning. And with regard to the faculty, metrics, I think Zach writes elegantly about this. Metrics are the tool by which we are left there to kneel before the altar. And we use the metrics against each other, not knowing that it's a neoliberal tool. And that, I think, is probably one of the worst things. I've often mentioned to some of my colleagues that we have a couple of generations of faculty here. They have the ones who are long in the tooth, like me and Frank, and the ones who don't have such long tooths as Sharon and Zach and, and some others. But they don't know the academy that we knew. And so I think it's important for the senior scholars like you, Nathan, to also, and I appreciate what you do, help other senior scholars recognize that, we have to create that clash of perspectives, so that there can be an epiphany on their part to understand that this is not the academy, this is not what the academy was made for. It was not to be the servant of industry. It was supposed to help us develop our innate talents to the highest level possible and to keep promoting civilization to higher and higher levels. That's what it's all about. And, we've lost that big picture. I mean, take a look at sociology. When's the last time you saw a major book on societal trends that really showed us what's happening? I mean, everybody's just cranking out these little empirical studies of what I would call vulgar empiricism, and just cranking them out, making sure that they get counted as part of the metrics, and they get their little salary increase or merit increase and so on. And we're just, like cogs in a wheel. We're, really, that's where we're at. I've been very, very impressed, and actually I haven't read a book that excited me as much as Edward Said's 1993 book titled Representations of Intellectuals. And I recall one line that he makes there. I don't know if anybody else here has read it, but he talks about the purpose of intellectuals, and it's really twofold for him. One is to promote freedom and to develop new knowledge. I think our colleagues are engaged in the second, but they've forgotten what the first one is all about.
Yeah, so well stated. Okay, let's pivot to, I'm looking at the clock here, in terms of our final comments. And let's turn to Sharon first for final comments from your perspective based on what you have heard and experienced today.
Well, first of all, I wish we could just keep talking because there's been so much, so much I'd like to comment on, especially as a faculty member at a research one who Save Our Schools Arizona has both a 501c3 and a 501c4. So it's like having another job. And I would not be doing this work if I weren't tenured. For one, and it's put the brakes on my research agenda because I'm a modernist poetry scholar, which has nothing to do with public education. So I guess I would just reiterate many of the things that have been said. I think one of the reasons I'm so passionate about Save Our Schools Arizona is that we truly are a nonpartisan grassroots organization. We were fully volunteer in our first year. We've gotten a little bit of grant funding, but the leadership team remains primarily volunteers. And we do that in part to try to stay out of, of course, we'd like funding. We need funding to sustain ourselves and our organizations, but we don't want to get caught up in that system of having strings attached to the funding. And so what we really primarily focus on as an organization is trying to reach every community of Arizona. With the little money we've had, we've hired community action team leaders across the state. We have a focus on Native populations, of which there are many in Arizona, and people of color who are used to push these agendas. Their latest voucher expansion they tried to push this year, the Koch Foundation, the Americans for Prosperity, which is the sort of one of the organizations under the Koch money, created a film talking about how vouchers are the civil rights issue of our time. And, it was just horrible what they have done. And so I do feel very, very strongly that Arizona will continue to be on the forefront of seeing how these privatization efforts play out, especially in K through 12. We are very, very hopeful that we can go on the offense at some point, because there's a lot of work to undo. Many different levels, especially legislatively. Arizona has laid the legal foundation. Like I said, there's just no accountability or transparency. So we're trying to come up with plans, if we do have a legislature that's willing to put the brakes on this stuff, to start building in ways that we require any public funds spent on education to have to adhere to the same accountability and transparency, to level the playing field that way. And then, of course, we'd like to stop all the holes in the bucket of public education funding that drain hundreds of millions of dollars away from our very, very desperate and struggling public schools. So I think the work is incredibly important, so much so that, my real job at the university doesn't always get all the attention it deserves, especially my research agenda. But just this conversation, talking to you all, has only underscored the importance of continuing these conversations with all kinds of people, not just with ourselves in the university, but within the communities who are most impacted by these schemes. So keep an eye on Arizona. We hope you'll visit sosaznetwork.org, which is our website. We also have sosarizona.org. We follow the legislature very closely. And if you want to know what's coming to a state near you, just watch what's happening in the legislature at Arizona. We will keep you informed and try to provide ways to help people get involved in their local elections, their local legislatures. And we also partner with other truly grassroots public education organizations across the country. So if you do know people who might be interested, I'm always happy to make those connections or invite people to our conversations. So always feel free to reach out to me. And thanks again for the opportunity to be here today.
Well, thank you so very much, Sharon, for that work. And, one of the things that you said is so true, and activists know this. We spend so much time on the defense that it's very difficult to pivot to the offense. And then when you think you have an opening, whoa, you're back on defense again. And so it's a real challenge. There's no question about that. Jasmine, we'll turn to you for your comments and then close with Rubén.
Yeah, well, like many nonprofit projects within the nonprofit industrial complex, UNKOCH is grossly under-resourced and underfunded. So any kind of material support that folks can provide to us is critical. We're grateful to do this work, and we'll do it no matter the paycheck, and we have to take good care of our families. So always the appeal there, and then just deep gratitude for this space and for FutureU and how you're creating some opportunities to dissent from the neoliberal machine. It's really, really important. So thank you.
Thank you for your work. Rubén.
I really appreciate the comments that everyone's made today. I think we need to be able to envision a social movement. Social movements bring together theory and practice into an integrated form of praxis, and it takes all levels of members of society. And I think we all have our respective roles, and we have to respect those different roles and so on. Our vision really should be, because it will take a social movement to halt the transformation, and we really need to be thinking and taking strident steps, as Jasmine says, to arrive at a level of action. We have got to get to that point. And I just am really thankful to Jasmine and Sharon for joining us today and bringing us back to the concrete world of everyday life and where people's real struggles are located. I want to thank Nathan, who always has something insightful to say, and Zach for his enthusiasm and for joining us. And I want to thank everybody who is out there in the cyber land who continue to visit with us on our FutureU activities. And Frank, I want to thank you very much for the work that you do in keeping us going.
Thank you very much. And I also want to thank all of you who are watching, not only today live on YouTube, but also in the future. We'll make sure that it's on our YouTube channel on YouTube, and we see the numbers of people who view this program days and weeks and sometimes months after the live presentation. And also check us out at our website. It's FutureU, one word, FutureU, U the letter, not you, the Y-O-U. It's futureu.education. Again, thank you so much, Jasmine. Thank you, Sharon, for taking the time. Wonderful presentations. Rubén, as always, Zach and Nathan and all of you watching, we hope you enjoyed it, made you think a bit, but most importantly, or more importantly, get active to change the world. Take care, everyone.